On a busy street on Halloween night, Ethan, a black boy in a wheelchair, eagerly waited for his parents to come home from work so they could go trick-or-treating together. But a short call from his mother saying she had to stay in a meeting shattered his excitement. He went out alone in his Spider-Man costume to collect candy with his friends. When they knocked on the door of a house at the end of the street, a huge cold-looking Hell's Angels man opened it. Screams and panic broke out as the kids ran away in fear, bumping into Ethan and knocking him to the ground in the rain. The Hell's Angels man slowly stepped forward, making Ethan tremble in fear. But then, what the man did next left the boy completely stunned. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The whole neighborhood buzzed with Halloween fever. Orange pumpkins lined every porch, fake cobwebs draped across mailboxes, inflatable ghosts bobbed in the October breeze. From his bedroom window on the second floor, Ethan Reed watched a group of kids across the street testing their costumes, a vampire cape swirling a princess, twirling a makeshift Iron Man suit, gleaming under the afternoon sun. Mr. Howard. Ethan spun his wheelchair around, grinning. Did you see the Johnsons put up a giant spider? It's at least 10 feet tall. The elderly butler glanced up from arranging Ethan's medication on the nightstand. Indeed, Master Ethan, quite the spectacle. And Mom and Dad will be home by 6, right? They promised. Ethan's hazel eyes sparkled. He grabbed the edge of his desk, pulling himself closer to the window. We're gonna hit every house on Maple Street. I've got my route all planned out. Mr. Howard's weathered face softened. Your parents will do their very best, young sir. No, they will be here. Ethan's voice carried that stubborn edge of a 10-year-old who needed to believe. Mom said so this morning. She said, "Sweetheart, we wouldn't miss it for the world." Those were her exact words. He turned back to the window, pressing his palm against the glass. Outside, more families emerged, dads hauling bags of candy, moms adjusting witch hats on squirming toddlers. The whole street seemed alive, glowing with something magical. For the first time in months, Ethan felt it too. The Reed mansion stood at the end of Rosewood Drive, all steel beams and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of house that appeared in architecture magazines. Inside it echoed every footstep on marble floors, every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Ethan rolled himself down the corridor toward the kitchen where Mr. Howard was preparing dinner. I'm thinking we start at the Hendersons' house, Ethan said, trailing behind. They always give out the full-size candy bars. Then we loop around to... His phone buzzed on his lap. Mom flashed across the screen. Ethan snatched it up. Mom, are you guys on the way? Honey! His mother's voice crackled through the speaker, tight and apologetic. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Ethan's smile froze. There's been a situation with the Singapore merger. Your father and I have to stay for an emergency call with the board. We won't make it home in time. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. Mr. Howard stopped chopping vegetables, his knife hovering midair. But you said... Ethan's voice came out small. You promised. I know, baby. I know. She sighed, and he could picture her pinching the bridge of her nose the way she always did when stressed. We'll make it up to you, okay? Next weekend we'll do something special. Just the three of us. Whatever you want. Ethan stared at the floor tiles. 1, 2, 3. He counted them silently. Ethan, are you there? Yeah. His throat felt thick. It's fine. Mr. Howard will take you trick-or-treating. Won't that be fun? Sure. Honey. I gotta go, Mom. He ended the call before she could say anything else. The kitchen settled back into silence, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of children laughing outside. Mr. Howard cleared his throat. Master Ethan, I would be honored to accompany you this evening. We could. I'm not hungry. Ethan turned his wheelchair, sharply rolling toward the hallway. I'm gonna go to my room. But dinner is nearly... I said I'm not hungry. The words came out harsher than he meant. Mr. Howard's expression flickered just for a moment, but Ethan caught it. The old man nodded slowly, returning to his vegetables without another word. Ethan's hands trembled as he pushed himself down the corridor past family photos that barely included him anymore, past the living room where the TV played to no one. Back in his bedroom, Ethan locked the door. He didn't turn on the lights. The orange glow from the street lamps outside filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the walls. He could hear everything now, the doorbell chimes from neighboring houses, the excited shrieks of trick or treat, the rustle of candy wrappers. He rolled to the window and looked out. A little boy dressed as Captain America raced down the sidewalk, his plastic shield bouncing against his back. His mom jogged behind, laughing, trying to keep up. At the house across the street, a dad lifted his daughter dressed as a bumblebee so she could reach the doorbell. Ethan's chest tightened. Maybe heroes don't need anyone. Right? He sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The sky darkened from orange to deep purple. More kids flooded the streets, zombies, princesses, superheroes, monsters, and Ethan just watched. Then his eyes drifted to his closet. Slowly, he wheeled himself over and pulled the door open. Hanging on the left side, still in its plastic wrapper, was his Spider-Man costume. The red and blue fabric gleamed even in the dim light. His mom had ordered it online 2 months ago, making sure it fit perfectly over his leg braces. Ethan reached out fingers, brushing the material. I can still go. The thought came quietly, but it grew louder. I don't need them. I can do this myself. He pulled the costume off the hanger, letting the plastic wrapper fall to the floor. With practice movements, he changed, tugging the suit over his legs, adjusting the mask so it sat just right on his face, covering everything from his nose up. He caught his reflection in the mirror mounted on the closet door. A small Spider-Man stared back red and blue, ready to save the day. Ethan tried to smile. He forced his lips to curve upward, but his eyes stayed sad. Outside, the laughter grew louder. The doorbell symphony played on. He took a breath, then another. Okay, he whispered to his reflection. Let's do this. The glow from the jack-o'-lanterns outside caught the edge of his mask, reflecting a faint, flickering orange like a tiny spark of hope refusing to go out. Ethan turned his wheelchair toward the door and didn't look back. The front door clicked shut behind Ethan. Cool air hit his face. The neighborhood had transformed completely. Every house glowed with carved pumpkins. Every yard crawled with decorations. The smell of autumn leaves mixed with the faint sweetness of candy. Ethan rolled down the driveway ramp, his pillowcase candy bag hanging from the armrest. Across the street, a familiar voice called out, "Yo, is that Spider-Man?" Ethan's head snapped up. A group of kids from his class stood under a street lamp, 5 of them all in costume. Marcus wore a vampire cape, fake blood dripping from his chin. Sophie twirled in a sparkly princess dress. Jake had pieced together an Iron Man suit from cardboard and spray paint. Emma carried a Captain America shield, and Tyler wore a hockey mask, pretending to be some kind of serial killer. "Ethan," Sophie waved enthusiastically. "Oh my God, you actually came out." Ethan wheeled toward them, suddenly feeling lighter. "Yeah, you guys look awesome." "Dude, your costume is sick." Marcus crouched down to get a better look at the mask. "That's the real deal, huh? My mom got it online." Ethan's voice carried a hint of pride. "It's got the web pattern and everything. You should totally come with us." Emma adjusted her shield. "We're hitting Maple Street first, then looping back around to Oakwood." "Really?" Ethan's eyes widened behind the mask. "Yeah, man, the more the merrier." Tyler gave him a fist bump. For a moment, just a brief shining moment, Ethan forgot about the empty house behind him. They started off together. The group moved as a pack, racing from house to house, their pillowcases growing heavier with each stop. Ethan pushed his wheels as fast as he could, trying to keep up with their energy. "Come on, Spidey," Marcus called back, already halfway up the next driveway. Ethan grinned and pushed harder, but the sidewalk had other plans. His front wheel caught on a raised crack in the concrete. The chair jolted, then came the crunch of dry leaves under his tires, loud, slow scraping against the pavement. Up ahead, the group had already reached the Henderson house, crowding around the door. By the time Ethan arrived, they were running back down the steps. "Dude, they're giving out king-size Snickers!" Jake shouted, not even stopping. "Wait!" Ethan started, but they were already gone, racing toward the next house. He rolled up to the door alone and knocked. Mrs. Henderson appeared, smiling warmly. "Well, hello there, Spider-Man. Aren't you just the cutest thing?" She dropped a candy bar into his bag. "Thank you," Ethan said, but his eyes were already following his friend's silhouettes down the street. He turned and pushed forward. The pattern repeated. At the Martinez house, he arrived just as the porch light clicked off. At the O'Connells, he got there in time to see Sophie and Emma sprinting away, giggling about something he hadn't heard. The wheels of his chair ground slowly over the uneven sidewalk. Every pebble, every acorn, every pothole made the journey harder. Crunch, scrape, bump. His arms started to ache. "Hey, guys, wait up!" Ethan called out, but the wind carried his voice away. Marcus glanced back, once waved, then kept running. They weren't trying to leave him behind, Ethan knew that. They were just being kids. Fast kids. Kids who could race from door to door without thinking about cracks in the sidewalk or how heavy a wheelchair gets after half a mile. At the corner of Maple and Birch, Ethan stopped. His friends were barely visible now, just colorful blurs under the streetlights, their laughter fading into the distance. He looked down at his candy bag. 3 pieces, maybe 4. For a second, he thought about turning back, going home, telling Mr. Howard he wasn't feeling well. But then he remembered the empty hallways, the silent kitchen, the ticking clock. No, he whispered, not yet. He pushed forward. The temperature dropped. A light drizzle began to fall, so faint at first that Ethan barely noticed. Then it came, heavier, tiny droplets speckling his mask, dampening his costume. The jack-o'-lanterns on nearby porches flickered as the wind picked up their carved faces, grinning or grimacing in the unsteady light. Ethan's breath came out in small clouds. He passed another house, its lights already off for the night. Then another. The street had started to empty. Most families had gone inside, their trick-or-treating done. Somewhere far ahead he heard a burst of laughter. His friends probably, or maybe just some other group. It didn't matter anymore. Ethan kept rolling, even though his hands were cold and his shoulders burned, even though the wheels kept catching on wet leaves that clung to the pavement like they were trying to hold him back. He turned down a side street, one he didn't recognize, hoping maybe there'd be a few houses still giving out candy. The orange glow from a nearby pumpkin caught his mask, reflecting light across his face. For just a second, it looked almost hopeful. Almost. But when the light flickered and dimmed, Ethan was just a small boy in a wet costume alone on a dark street, pushing forward because he didn't know what else to do. He wiped the drizzle from his mask and kept going. I just wanted to have some fun too. The thought came quietly, swallowed by the sound of rain tapping against plastic pumpkins and distant laughter that wasn't meant for him. Ethan turned the corner onto Crescent Lane and froze. Up ahead, under a flickering streetlight, his friends stood clustered together, staring at something. "No way," Marcus's voice carried back. "That house has never been open on Halloween." Ethan pushed himself forward, curiosity pulling him closer. The house sat at the very end of the street, a weathered 2-story, with peeling gray paint and a sagging porch. The lawn was neat enough, but everything about the place whispered, "Keep away." No decorations, no pumpkins, just a single yellow bulb burning above the front door. And, parked in the driveway, gleaming under the streetlight, was a massive black Harley-Davidson, chrome exhaust pipes, leather saddlebags, and a license plate with a skull graphic that seemed to grin in the dim light. Ethan rolled closer, his wet wheels squeaking. "Guys," he called softly. They turned. Sophie's princess dress was damp from the drizzle. Jake's cardboard Iron Man suit had started to sag. "Ethan, dude, check this out." Tyler pointed at the door. Mounted just above the doorbell was a wooden sign, hand-carved bold letters burned into the wood. "Hell's Angels. Is that like a gang?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's a biker club," Jake said, but his voice shook. "My dad told me about them. They're like really dangerous." "We should just skip it," Sophie said, taking 2 steps back. Her hands twisted the fabric of her dress. "Are you kidding?" Marcus grinned, but even he looked nervous. "This is the best dare ever. Who's gonna knock?" "Not me." Sophie shook her head violently. "Absolutely not me." Emma echoed, gripping her shield like it might actually protect her. Tyler swallowed hard. What if he's like a criminal or something?" "My cousin said bikers carry knives," Jake whispered. Marcus's grin faltered. "You guys are chickens." "Then you do it," Emma shot back. "Fine." Marcus puffed out his chest, but Ethan noticed his hands were trembling. "I'll do it." He crept up the porch steps like he was walking toward a tiger's cage. Each wooden board creaked under his feet. He glanced back at the group Sophie had backed up even further. Emma looked ready to bolt. Jake's face had gone pale. Marcus reached out slowly, then pulled his hand back. "Come on, man," Tyler hissed. Marcus took a breath and knocked 3 times. The sound echoed like thunder. Then, silence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the door swung open. The man who stood in the doorway was massive, easily 6'4", broad-shouldered like a linebacker with a thick gray beard that reached his chest. His arms were completely covered in tattoos, skulls with empty eye sockets, flames licking up his forearms, eagles with talons, extended chains wrapped around his biceps, all inked in black and gray. He wore a black leather vest over a faded Harley-Davidson t-shirt, and his hands looked like they could crush concrete. Yellow light spilled out from behind him, casting harsh shadows that made every line on his face look deeper, angrier. The glow caught his tattoos, making them seem to move in the flickering light. His eyes, sharp steel blue cold, locked onto Marcus. "Yeah." His voice was like gravel grinding under boots. Marcus's mouth opened. No sound came out. His whole body went rigid. "I said yeah." The man's eyebrows furrowed. He crossed those enormous tattooed arms across his chest. "Ah!" Sophie screamed, a high-pitched shriek of pure terror. That broke the spell. "Run, run, run!" Jake yelled, his voice cracking. The whole group exploded into chaos, vampire cape-flying princess dress tangling around Sophie's legs as she stumbled backward, cardboard armor pieces falling off Jake as he sprinted. Tyler threw his hockey mask aside so he could run faster. "He's gonna kill us!" Emma screamed. They bolted down the street like a pack of terrified rabbits, screaming into the night, not looking back. "Wait, guys!" Ethan called out, but they were already gone, disappeared into the darkness like they'd been swallowed whole. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. His hands gripped the wheelchair rims slick with rain and sweat. He looked up at the porch. The man was still standing there, backlit by that harsh yellow light looking down at him. Every instinct in Ethan's body screamed run, but he couldn't run. He could barely move. His hands fumbled for the wheels, trying to turn the chair around. The wet rubber slipped under his palms. "No, no, no!" The chair lurched sideways instead of backward. He tried to turn his wheelchair around, panic flooding his chest. The chair tipped, and Ethan went down hard. He hit the pavement on his side, the impact rattling through his whole body. His candy bag exploded chocolate bars skittering across the wet concrete like marbles. Pain shot through his elbow and hip. Ah! Footsteps, heavy, fast, coming toward him. Ethan's vision blurred with panic. He tried to push himself up, his palms scraping against rough concrete, but his legs were useless. They always were, and his arms shook so badly he couldn't get leverage. "He's coming. Oh God, he's coming." The footsteps got closer, louder. Ethan's breath came in short, ragged gasps. He twisted his head, looking up through the crooked Spider-Man mask. The man loomed over him, a dark silhouette against the streetlight, tattooed arms hanging at his sides, those massive scarred hands flexing. Ethan tried to scoot backward, his fingers clawing at the pavement, but he barely moved an inch. "Please, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to bother you." The words tumbled out in a terrified rush. "Please don't hurt me." "Easy there, little hero." Ethan froze. The man crouched down slowly, carefully bringing himself to eye level. Up close, he looked even bigger. A silver chain hung around his neck, with a skull pendant. His knuckles were scarred and weathered. The tattoo on his left forearm showed a snake coiling around a dagger. Ethan's whole body trembled. He pressed himself against the cold pavement, trying to make himself smaller. "You're okay," the man said, his voice softer, now steady. "Just took a spill, that's all." Ethan stared at him wide-eyed, chest heaving. His mind screamed at him to get away, but his body wouldn't cooperate. The man glanced at the overturned wheelchair, then back at Ethan. "Can you move your arms? Anything hurt bad?" I don't know." Ethan's voice came out as barely a whisper. "All right, I'm gonna help you up okay. Nice and slow." The man reached out with those enormous hands, one moving toward Ethan's shoulder, the other toward his back. Ethan flinched hard, squeezing his eyes shut, waiting for he didn't know what. Pain. Something bad. But the hands were gentle. With surprising care, the man lifted Ethan like he weighed nothing and set him carefully back into the wheelchair, making sure his legs were positioned properly. Then he crouched again, picking up the scattered candy bars, one by one, his huge tattooed fingers delicate as he dropped them back into the pillowcase. "There we go." He handed the bag to Ethan. "Good as new." Ethan clutched the bag to his chest, still shaking. His Spider-Man mask had slipped crooked, half covering one eye. Rain dripped from the fabric, mixing with tears he didn't realize had started falling. The man studied him for a moment, then let out a long breath. "You're soaked. Come on inside. Let's get you dried off." I should go home." Ethan's voice cracked. "Kid," the man's tone wasn't harsh, just firm. "You're shivering, your elbow's bleeding, and your friends just left you in the street. Come inside. I'll call your folks if you want, but let's at least get you warm first." Ethan looked down. Blood seeped through a small tear in his costume sleeve, mixing with rainwater. He hadn't even felt it. He looked back up at the man, this huge, terrifying stranger with skulls tattooed on his arms and a Hell's Angels sign on his door. Every fiber of his being said no, but the rain kept falling. His friends were gone, and somehow, looking into those steel blue eyes, Ethan saw something he didn't expect. Concern. Quietly trembling, he nodded. "Okay." The man stood and stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door with one tattooed arm. Ethan rolled forward slowly, every instinct screaming at him to turn around, his heart still pounding like a drum. But the rain kept falling. His friends had abandoned him, and the house he'd left behind, the empty one, felt a million miles away. So he rolled through the doorway, into the light, into the unknown. The inside of the house was nothing like Ethan expected. Warm. That was the first thing he noticed. Not just the temperature, though, it was much warmer than outside, but the feeling of it. Soft yellow lamplight filled a small living room. A worn leather couch sat against one wall, a coffee table stacked with motorcycle magazines in front of it. The faint smell of coffee and wood smoke hung in the air. "Sit tight," the man said, closing the door behind them. Ethan's hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. His heart still hammered, but slower now. The man walked to a hallway closet and pulled out a towel. "I'm Dylan, by the way. Dylan Carter." Ethan," he managed. Dylan came back and draped the towel over Ethan's shoulders, then crouched down to examine his elbow. "Let's see what we got here." He pulled up the torn sleeve carefully. The scrape wasn't deep, just raw and bleeding a little. Dylan disappeared into what looked like a bathroom and returned with a first aid kit. "This might sting," he warned, dabbing the wound with an antiseptic wipe. Ethan winced but didn't pull away. Dylan worked quickly, cleaning the scrape and covering it with a bandage. His hands, those huge, scarred, tattooed hands, moved with surprising gentleness, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. "There." Dylan stood. "Good as new. You hungry?" Before Ethan could answer, Dylan headed toward the kitchen. Ethan heard the clink of mugs, the hiss of a kettle. He sat there, still trembling slightly, looking around. The house was quiet, lived in. A Harley-Davidson calendar hung on the wall. Framed photos lined a bookshelf, Dylan with other bikers, all leather and motorcycles. But no family photos, no wife, no kids. Dylan returned, carrying a steaming mug. Hot cocoa, best thing for a cold night. He set it on the coffee table in front of Ethan, then grabbed a large bowl from the kitchen counter and placed it beside the mug. It was filled with candy, full-size chocolate bars, lollipops, gummy bears. "Help yourself," Dylan said. Ethan stared at the mug, then at Dylan. "You're giving me candy." "It's Halloween, isn't it?" Dylan settled into the leather couch with his own mug of coffee. "That's how it works." Ethan reached for the cocoa with shaking hands. It was warm. Real. The marshmallows floated on top, already starting to melt. He took a sip. It was perfect. Outside the window, hidden behind the neighbor's fence, 5 kids crouched in the shadows. "Do you see him?" Sophie whispered, her voice tight with fear. Marcus pressed his face against the gap in the wooden slats. "Yeah, he's inside." "What's the guy doing?" Jake asked, his cardboard armor now completely soaked and falling apart. "I can't tell." Marcus squinted. "Wait, he's giving him something. A drink, I think." "Oh my God," Emma breathed. "What if it's poisoned?" "We should call the cops," Tyler said, pulling out his phone. "And say what?" Marcus shot back. "Some scary biker gave our friend hot chocolate. He could be drugging him." Sophie's voice rose to a panicked whisper. "We have to do something." Inside, oblivious to the surveillance, Ethan took another sip of cocoa. His body was starting to relax. The warmth seeped into his bones, chasing away the cold. Dylan sat across from him, not saying anything, just drinking his coffee and giving Ethan space. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. Dylan nodded. "You're welcome, kid." Ethan glanced around the room again. His eyes drifted past the couch, past the bookshelf, toward a half-open door down the hallway. He froze. Through the crack, he could see colors. Bright colors. "What's in there?" he asked before he could stop himself. Dylan followed his gaze. Something flickered across his face. Sadness, maybe. Or regret. "Go ahead," Dylan said softly. "Take a look." Ethan hesitated, then slowly wheeled himself toward the door. He pushed it open, and his jaw dropped. The room was filled with toys. Not just a few scattered items filled. Shelves lined the walls, packed with action figures still in their boxes. Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Spider-Man, Batman. Stuffed animals sat in neat rows, bears, lions, dinosaurs. A toy chest overflowed with Lego sets. Model cars lined a windowsill. Superhero posters covered the walls. It was a kid's dream room. But there was no bed, no desk, no kid. Everything was pristine, untouched, like a museum. Ethan rolled further inside, his eyes wide. He reached out and touched a Spider-Man figure, the same character he was dressed as. "Whose toys are these?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dylan appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. His expression was distant. For a long moment, he didn't answer. "They were my sons," he finally said. Ethan turned to look at him. "Were?" Dylan's jaw tightened. He looked away, staring at something only he could see. He never got to play with most of them. The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Ethan didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Dylan cleared his throat, pushing off the doorframe. "Come on, let's get back to the living room." Ethan followed, glancing back at the toy-filled room one last time before Dylan gently closed the door. They sat in silence for a minute. Ethan sipped his cocoa. Dylan stared into his coffee. Then Dylan looked up, and something shifted in his expression. A small, sad smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You know what?" he said. "I haven't been trick-or-treating in years." Ethan blinked. "Really?" "Yeah." Dylan set his mug down. "Used to take my boy every Halloween. He loved it. Always wanted to hit every house on the block." He paused, then met Ethan's eyes. "Want to go trick-or-treat with me, Spider-Man?" Ethan stared at him. This huge, tattooed biker, the man his friends had run screaming from, was asking him to go trick-or-treating. You want to go with me?" "Why not?" Dylan shrugged. "You came all this way. Might as well get some decent candy out of it." Ethan looked down at his half-empty candy bag, then at Dylan, then at the door leading to that room full of untouched toys. He thought about his empty house, his absent parents, his friends who'd left him in the street. And he thought about this man, this stranger who'd picked him up, bandaged his scrape, and given him hot cocoa. Slowly, Ethan nodded. "Okay." Dylan's smile widened just a little, but it reached his eyes. "All right then, Spider-Man." He stood and grabbed a black leather jacket from the coat rack. "Let's get you some candy." He disappeared down the hallway and returned a moment later carrying something small. A child's leather jacket, black with tiny silver zippers. "Here." Dylan held it out. "It's going to rain harder soon. This'll keep you warm." Ethan stared at the jacket. It was clearly meant for a little boy, probably the same boy who owned all those toys. "I can't." "Take it," Dylan said, firmly but gently. He'd want someone to wear it. Ethan reached out with trembling hands and took the jacket. It was soft, well-made. He slipped it on over his damp Spider-Man costume. It fit perfectly. Dylan nodded in approval. "Now you look like a real hero." Outside, hidden behind the fence, the 5 kids watched in growing horror as Dylan pulled on his own leather jacket and opened the front door. "He's taking him outside," Emma gasped. "We have to follow them," Marcus said. "Are you crazy?" Sophie hissed, but it was too late. Dylan and Ethan were already heading down the driveway, the massive biker walking slowly beside the small boy in the wheelchair. And deep in the shadows, 5 terrified kids crept after them, convinced they were about to witness something terrible. They were barely down the driveway when Ethan heard it, a low rumble in the distance, growing louder. Dylan stopped, tilting his head toward the sound. A small smile crossed his face. "Right on time." "What is that?" Ethan asked, gripping his wheelchair rims. The rumble became a roar. Then from around the corner they appeared, motorcycles, dozens of them. Headlights cutting through the drizzle like searching beams. The sound of engines filled the entire street, a deep, thunderous chorus that rattled windows and vibrated through Ethan's chest. One by one, they rolled up and parked along both sides of the street. 10 bikes, 20, 30. More kept coming. Ethan's mouth fell open. Every rider wore black leather. Every bike gleamed with chrome. And strapped to the backs of nearly every motorcycle were enormous bags bulging with shapes that could only be toys and candy. The engines cut off one by one, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the patter of rain. A massive biker dismounted first, easily as big as Dylan, with a long braided beard and a bandana tied around his head. His leather vest bore the same insignia, a winged skull with Hell's Angels arched above it. He walked straight to Dylan and clasped his hand in a firm shake. "Dylan, good to see you, brother." "Same, Hawk." Dylan gestured toward Ethan. "We got a new recruit tonight." Hawk turned, and Ethan shrank back instinctively. But then Hawk smiled a genuine warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Well, look at that Spider-Man himself." He crouched down to Ethan's level. "You here to save the city with us, kid?" Ethan's voice caught in his throat. I don't. They're my family," Dylan said, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Tonight, we ride for the kids." More bikers gathered around, men and women, young and old, all wearing the same leather vests with the winged skull. Despite their intimidating appearances, they smiled at Ethan. A woman with silver hair and intricate rose tattoos waved at him. A younger guy with a goatee gave him a thumbs up. "First time on a ride?" asked a biker with glasses and a graying ponytail. Ethan nodded slowly. "You're gonna love it," the man said. "Name's Preacher. Used to be a teacher before I retired." "I'm Ethan." "Good to meet you, Ethan." Preacher extended a fist, and after a moment's hesitation, Ethan bumped it. "This is Rosie," Dylan said, gesturing to the silver-haired woman. "That's Gunner Tiny. Don't let the name fool you and Jade." Each biker waved or nodded as they were introduced. Their faces were weathered, scarred, tattooed, but their eyes were kind. "We do this every year," Rosie explained, kneeling beside Ethan. "Collect toys and candy, deliver them to kids who need them. Hospitals, shelters, foster homes. It's what we do," Tiny added. He was ironically the biggest of them all. Ethan looked around at the assembled group, at least 50 bikers, maybe more, all standing in the rain with bags full of gifts. You all do this." "Every Halloween," Dylan said, "for the last 15 years. Hawk patted Dylan's shoulder. "Since we lost Jamie." Dylan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Ethan's chest felt tight. These people, these terrifying leather-clad bikers, were doing something beautiful. So, Dylan crouched down beside Ethan's wheelchair. "You ready to ride with us?" Ethan's eyes went wide. On a motorcycle." "On my motorcycle." Dylan jerked his thumb toward the black Harley in the driveway. "See that?" Ethan looked closer. Attached to the side of Dylan's bike was a sidecar, a small compartment with a cushioned seat and a clear windshield. "You'll be safe in there," Dylan said. "I promise." Dylan lifted Ethan from the wheelchair gently, carefully, and set him in the sidecar. The seat was surprisingly comfortable, padded with thick cushions. Dylan fastened a harness across Ethan's chest and lap, making sure everything was secure. Then he reached into one of the bags and pulled out a small black helmet with a tinted visor. "This was Jamie's," Dylan said quietly, placing it on Ethan's head and adjusting the strap. "Fits you perfect." Ethan's hands touched the smooth surface of the helmet. Inside, he felt safe, protected. Dylan pulled out one more thing, a tiny leather vest, just like the ones the adults wore. But instead of the full Hell's Angels insignia, this one had a simpler design, a small pair of wings embroidered on the back with the words "Little Angel" stitched below. "For you," Dylan said, helping Ethan slip it over the jacket. Ethan looked down at himself, leather jacket vest, with wings Spider-Man costume underneath. He looked like a miniature biker superhero. "How do you feel?" Dylan asked. Ethan's voice came out small but steady. "Like I belong." Dylan's expression softened. "Good. Because you do." He swung his leg over the Harley and settled into the saddle. The engine roared to life beneath them, vibrating through the sidecar. Around them, 50 other engines started a symphony of thunder. Hawk raised his fist. "Let's ride, Angels!" A chorus of cheers erupted. And then they moved. The formation rolled through the neighborhood like a parade, but not a cheerful one. This was something else, something powerful. The bikes moved slowly at first, headlights, blazing engines rumbling. Orange Halloween lights reflected off chrome and leather. The rain had lightened to a mist, and the air smelled like wet asphalt and gasoline. Ethan's heart pounded not with fear, but with exhilaration. The wind whipped past his helmet. The streetlights blurred into streaks of orange and white. He gripped the edges of the sidecar, grinning so wide his face hurt. "You good?" Dylan shouted over the engine noise. "Yeah," Ethan shouted back. "This is amazing." Dylan grinned and twisted the throttle. The bike surged forward, and Ethan laughed a real, genuine laugh that he hadn't felt in months. Behind them, the pack followed in perfect formation, 2 columns of roaring motorcycles, their riders silhouetted against the Halloween night. And on Ethan's vest, the embroidered wings seemed to glow in the reflected light. They passed through downtown, where trick-or-treaters still wandered the sidewalks. Kids stopped and stared. Parents grabbed their children's hands and pulled them close. And then, someone screamed, "Oh my God, it's a biker gang. They have a kid with them." Wait, is that the Reed boy? Marcus, Sophie, Jake, Emma, and Tyler had been following at a distance, ducking behind parked cars. But now, seeing the massive convoy of bikers with Ethan trapped in the sidecar, they panicked. "They kidnapped him!" Sophie shrieked. "We have to call the police!" Emma fumbled for her phone. Jake was already dialing. "Hello, yes, this is an emergency. There's a gang, like 50 bikers, and they took our friend. They're heading toward the highway," Marcus yelled. Tyler grabbed a random adult walking by. Sir, you have to help. Our friend was taken by Hell's Angels." The adult looked at the motorcade disappearing around the corner, eyes wide. "I'll call 911. Within minutes, panicked calls flooded the police station. Parents emerged from their houses, pointing at the retreating line of motorcycles. Whispers spread like wildfire. Hell's Angels, kidnapping, rich family's son. But inside the sidecar, oblivious to the chaos behind him, Ethan tilted his head back and shouted into the wind, "Let's ride Angels!" His voice was barely audible over the engines, but Dylan heard it, and he smiled. The convoy roared through the city headlights, cutting through the mist, 50 riders united in purpose, carrying one small boy who for the first time in a long time didn't feel alone. The orange glow of jack-o'-lanterns reflected off their helmets and windshields, painting them in warm light as they disappeared into the Halloween night. Behind them, sirens began to wail. But ahead, children were waiting. The motorcycles pulled into the parking lot of St. Mary's Children's Home, a 3-story brick building with dim yellow lights in the windows. A hand-painted banner hung above the entrance, "Happy Halloween." The engines cut off one by one, leaving only the patter of rain and the distant sound of traffic. Dylan helped Ethan out of the sidecar, setting him back in his wheelchair that Hawk had somehow strapped to the back of another bike. Ethan's legs felt wobbly from the vibration of the ride, but his heart was still racing with excitement. "Ready?" Dylan asked, handing him a large bag filled with candy and small toys. Ethan nodded, gripping the bag tight. The front doors opened, and a woman in her 50s stepped out, gray hair pulled back, warm smile, wearing a cardigan despite the cold. "Dylan." She hurried down the steps and hugged him. "Right on time as always. Wouldn't miss it, Mrs. Patterson." Dylan gestured to the assembled bikers unloading their bags. "Brought the whole crew this year." Mrs. Patterson's eyes glistened. "The children are going to be so happy." She noticed Ethan and crouched down. "And who's this brave young man?" "Ethan," Dylan said. "He's riding with us tonight." "Well, Ethan, thank you for coming." She touched his shoulder gently. "The kids inside are going to love meeting Spider-Man." They filed into a large common room where about 20 children sat, waiting ages ranging from 5 to 14. Some wore costumes a ghost made from a bedsheet, a witch hat, a superhero cape clearly fashioned from an old towel. Others wore regular clothes too worn or too big. The moment the bikers entered the room, went silent. The children stared wide-eyed, uncertain. These massive leather-clad strangers with tattoos and beards looked like they'd walked out of a scary movie. Then Rosie stepped forward, pulling a stuffed bear from her bag. "Who wants a teddy bear?" She called out, her voice warm and inviting. A small hand shot up a little girl, maybe 6, with tangled blonde hair. Rosie walked over and handed it to her. "This one's for you, sweetheart." The girl clutched the bear to her chest, eyes shining. That broke the ice. Suddenly, the room exploded with noise, children rushing forward, laughing, shouting. The bikers knelt down, distributing toys and candy, ruffling hair, high-fiving, hugging. Ethan rolled forward slowly, watching it all unfold. A boy about his age, thin, wearing a faded Superman shirt, approached cautiously. "Are you really Spider-Man?" he asked. Ethan looked down at his costume, then back at the boy. "Yeah, well, kind of." "That's so cool." The boy's eyes lit up. "I love Spider-Man." Ethan reached into his bag and pulled out a small Spider-Man action figure. "Here. You can have this." The boy took it like it was made of gold. "Really? Really? Thanks." The boy ran off to show his friends, clutching the toy like a treasure. Ethan felt something warm spread through his chest. Dylan appeared beside him, carrying a stack of comic books. You're a natural." Together they moved through the room. Ethan handed out candy and small toys, and every time a child's face lit up, he felt that warmth grow stronger. Then he saw her, a little girl sitting alone in the corner, maybe 7 years old, with dark circles under her eyes and a breathing tube connected to a small oxygen tank. She watched the chaos with a faint smile, but didn't move. Ethan rolled over. "Hi." She looked up. "Hi, I'm Ethan. What's your name?" "Lily." "Do you like Spider-Man?" She nodded shyly. Ethan reached into his bag and pulled out the last action figure, a different one still in its package. He handed it to her. "This one's special. It's the limited edition." Lily's eyes went wide. "For me? For you?" She took it carefully, holding it like it might break. "Thank you." Ethan smiled. "You're welcome." Dylan crouched down beside them. "You doing okay, Lily?" "Yeah, Mr. Dylan." She hugged the toy to her chest. "This is the best Halloween ever." Dylan's expression softened. He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "Good. That's what we're here for." The next stop was Children's Memorial Hospital. The pediatric wing was quieter, sterile white walls, the smell of antiseptic, the beep of machines. But the moment the bikers arrived, pushing carts loaded with gifts, the atmosphere shifted. Nurses smiled, doctors waved, and children, some in wheelchairs, some with IVs, some with bandages, emerged from their rooms. Ethan rolled alongside Dylan, handing out toys and candy. But here the children looked different, pale, tired. Some had no hair. Others wore braces or casts. One boy, maybe 8, had only one arm. Ethan's throat tightened. He stopped in front of a room where a little girl lay in bed, her head wrapped in gauze, her mother sitting beside her holding her hand. "Can I?" Ethan gestured toward the door. Dylan nodded. "Go ahead." Ethan rolled in slowly. The girl looked over. She couldn't have been more than 5. "Hi," Ethan said softly. "Hi." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm Spider-Man." He tried to sound cheerful. "I brought you something." He pulled out a small stuffed spider with a goofy grin stitched on its face. The girl's eyes lit up just a little. "He's silly," she said. "Yeah, but he's brave too." Ethan handed it to her. "Just like you." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Ethan nodded and rolled back out. In the hallway he stopped. His hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, and he stared at the floor. Dylan appeared beside him. "You okay?" Ethan's voice came out small. "Some kids don't even have a home. Or a mom." Dylan crouched down, meeting his eyes. "Yeah, and some of them are really sick." Ethan's voice cracked. "Like, really sick." "Yeah," Dylan said again, quieter this time. Ethan looked up at him, his eyes glassy behind the Spider-Man mask. "I thought I had it bad. My parents are never home, and I can't walk. And sometimes I feel so, alone." Dylan didn't interrupt. He just listened. "But these kids," Ethan gestured around, "they don't have anything." Dylan's expression was gentle. "That's why we're here, Ethan. Because tonight they've got angels." Ethan stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah, they do." Before they left, Mrs. Patterson gathered everyone, bikers and children, into the hospital courtyard for a photo. 50 leather-clad bikers stood in rows, children sitting in front of them or perched on their shoulders. Ethan sat front and center in his wheelchair, flanked by Dylan on one side and Lily from the orphanage on the other, still clutching her Spider-Man toy. "Everybody say Halloween." The nurse with the camera called out, "Halloween." The flash went off, capturing the moment. Rough bikers with soft smiles, sick children with bright eyes, and one small boy in a Spider-Man costume who finally understood what it meant to be a hero. On the ride back, the night had grown colder. The streets were emptier now. Most trick-or-treaters had gone home. Ethan sat quietly in the sidecar, the photo tucked safely in his jacket pocket. Dylan glanced over. "You tired?" "A little." Ethan paused. "Dylan?" "Yeah. I used to think I was so unlucky, because my parents are always working and I can't do the things other kids do and—" His voice trailed off. Dylan slowed the bike slightly, giving him space to talk. "But those kids tonight, they don't have parents at all, or they're really sick. And they were still happy." Ethan's voice grew stronger. "They were happy just to get a toy or some candy. They were—" Dylan agreed. "I've been feeling sorry for myself." Ethan looked down at his hands. "But I have a home. I have people who care about me. I have a lot." Dylan pulled the bike to a stop at a red light and turned to look at Ethan fully. "You know what that means?" Dylan asked. "What?" It means you're growing up. The light turned green. Dylan twisted the throttle and the bike surged forward. But before the engine noise drowned out everything else, Ethan heard Dylan say one more thing. Your parents are lucky to have you, kid. Ethan didn't respond. He just smiled a real, genuine smile and watched the Halloween lights blur past as they headed home. In his pocket, the photo pressed against his chest, warm and solid, like proof that tonight had been real. The rumor spread like wildfire. Did you hear Hell's Angels took the Reed kid? I saw it with my own eyes, at least 50 bikers, and that poor boy was trapped in some kind of cage on the motorcycle. Someone needs to call his parents. I already called the police. By the time Dylan's motorcycle turned onto Rosewood Drive, half the neighborhood had gathered on their porches, whispering behind cupped hands, phones pressed to their ears. Marcus stood on his front lawn phone clutched in his shaking hand. He'd been the one to find Mrs. Reed's emergency number online. Mrs. Reed, his voice cracked. It's Marcus, Ethan's friend. You need to come home right now. These bikers, they took Ethan, like a whole gang of them. We tried to stop them, but he didn't get to finish. The line went dead. 200 miles away in a glass-walled conference room, Catherine Reed dropped her phone. We have to go. Now. Her voice cut through the meeting like a knife. Catherine, we're in the middle of... Her husband started. Our son has been kidnapped. She was already grabbing her coat, her face pale. We're leaving. Now. Richard Reed stood his jaw tight. Cancel everything. We're going home. They ran to the parking garage, tires screeching as they peeled out into the night. Catherine's hands trembled on the dashboard. I should have been there. We should have been there. Richard pushed the accelerator harder. We'll get him back. We'll get him back. The speedometer climbed past 80, then 90. Neither of them spoke again. They just drove two parents racing through the darkness, terrified of what they might find. Dylan's Harley pulled up in front of the Reed mansion at 9:47 p.m. The house blazed with light, every window, every porch lamp. The driveway was empty, but police cruisers lined the street, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in frantic colors. Dylan cut the engine. Looks like we've got a welcoming committee, he muttered. Ethan looked around confused. Why are the police here? Before Dylan could answer, two officers approached, hands resting on their holsters. Sir, step away from the child. Dylan raised his hand slowly. Easy. I'm bringing him home. Step away from the vehicle. Now. Dylan did as he was told, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible. Behind him, Hawk and the other bikers had stopped their motorcycles at a distance, engines idling. One officer moved to the sidecar. Son, are you all right? Did this man hurt you? What? No. Ethan's eyes went wide. Dylan's my friend. We were just... Headlights flooded the street. A black Mercedes screeched to a halt, tires smoking. Both doors flew open. Catherine Reed stumbled out her heels, catching on the pavement. Ethan. Mom. She ran, not caring about the police, not caring about anything except reaching her son. She dropped to her knees beside the sidecar, hands frantically checking him over. Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? Oh my God, baby. Mom, I'm fine. Richard Reed marched straight toward Dylan, his face twisted with rage. You... He jabbed a finger at Dylan's chest. You kidnapped my son. Sir, I didn't. Don't. Richard's voice cracked like thunder. Don't you dare speak to me. Catherine had lifted Ethan out of the sidecar, clutching him tight. She turned, saw Dylan standing there, this massive tattooed stranger in black leather, and something inside her snapped. She rushed forward and slapped Dylan across the face. The sound echoed down the street. Dylan's head turned with the impact. He didn't raise his hands, didn't defend himself, just stood there taking it. You monster, Catherine screamed. He's just a child, a child. Ma'am. Dylan's voice was low, steady. I'm calling the police. Richard pulled out his phone. You're going to prison for this. The police are already here, sir, one of the officers said carefully. Then arrest him. Richard's face had gone red. Kidnapping, endangerment, whatever you can charge him with. Dylan stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Hawk and the other bikers had dismounted, but Dylan raised a hand, signaling them to stay back. Sir, Dylan said quietly, looking at Richard, I understand you're upset. Upset? Richard's voice climbed higher. You took my son without permission. You. He gestured at the motorcycles, the bikers, the leather, and tattoos. What kind of sicko are you? Ethan wriggled free from his mother's grip. Dad, stop. Ethan, get in the house, now. No. Ethan's voice broke. You don't understand. He didn't kidnap me. Sweetheart, he manipulated you. Catherine reached for him. He helped me. Tears streamed down Ethan's face now. I was alone. You weren't here. You promised, and you weren't here, and I was all alone, and Dylan, his voice cracked. Dylan was the only one who cared. Catherine's face crumpled. Baby, he took me to see other kids. Kids who don't have homes. Kids who are sick. Kids who are dying. Ethan's whole body shook. And we gave them toys and candy, and we made them happy, and it was the best night of my life. Richard stared at his son, his anger faltering for just a moment. He's my friend, Ethan sobbed. He's good. He's good. Dylan stepped forward slowly, his hands still raised. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, I'm sorry I scared you. I should have called. I should have asked permission. His voice was calm, measured. But your son, he just wanted to feel like a kid tonight. Catherine looked at Dylan, really looked at him. At the leather jacket that was clearly too small for any adult. At the gentle way he'd kept his distance, even after being slapped, at the pain in his eyes. I wasn't trying to take him from you, Dylan continued. I was just trying to give him what I couldn't give my own son. Richard's expression shifted. Your son. Dylan's jaw tightened. He died a long time ago. Every Halloween I do this, ride me and my crew to honor him. Tonight Ethan rode with us. The street had gone quiet. Even the police officers stood silent. Catherine's hand went to her mouth. I'm sorry I frightened you, Dylan said again. That was never my intention. Richard looked at his son, this small, brave boy still wearing a tiny leather vest with wings on the back, tears streaming down his face. Then he looked at Dylan, and some of the anger drained away, replaced by something else. Shame, maybe, or confusion. Richard started, then stopped. Dylan took a step back. He's home safe. That's all that matters. He turned toward his Harley. Wait! Ethan lunged forward in his wheelchair, reaching out, but Catherine held him back. Ethan, no. Mom, please! Dylan swung his leg over the motorcycle. The engine roared to life. Dylan! Ethan's voice broke completely now. Dylan! But Dylan didn't turn around. He just sat there for a moment, shoulders tense, hands gripping the handlebars. Then he twisted the throttle and pulled away. The other bikers followed in formation, 50 motorcycles rolling slowly down the street, their engines a mournful rumble. Ethan watched them go, tears blurring his vision. One by one, the red taillights disappeared into the darkness. Ethan clutched the photo in his pocket, the one from the hospital, so tight it crumpled. He didn't do anything wrong. Ethan whispered, his voice hollow. He didn't do anything wrong. Catherine knelt beside him, trying to pull him into a hug, but Ethan turned away. Richard stood frozen, watching the last motorcycle vanish around the corner, and in the silence that followed under the glow of police lights and Halloween decorations, no one spoke. The street felt colder than it had all night. Inside the mansion, the silence was suffocating. Catherine helped Ethan out of the wet leather jacket, her hands trembling. Richard paced near the fireplace, phone still clutched in his hand, jaw working, but no words coming out. Mr. Howard stood in the doorway, wringing his hands. Shall I prepare some tea, ma'am? No, thank you. Catherine's voice was tight. That will be all for tonight. The butler hesitated, glanced at Ethan's tear-streaked face, then quietly left. Catherine knelt in front of Ethan's wheelchair. Sweetheart, I need you to understand. Understand what? Ethan's voice was flat, empty. Those men, they're dangerous. We don't know who they are, what they wanted. I know who they are. Ethan stared at the floor. Dylan, Hawk, Rosie, Preacher, Tiny, Gunner, Jade. Richard stopped pacing. Ethan, they're good people. You can't possibly know that after one night, Catherine said, trying to keep her voice gentle. Sometimes adults, they can seem nice, but I'm not allowed to see Dylan anymore, am I? Ethan looked up at her. That's what you're going to say. Catherine and Richard exchanged glances. For your safety, Richard started. I'm not allowed, Ethan repeated. It wasn't a question. No, Catherine said firmly. You're not. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay. Catherine blinked. Okay. Okay. Ethan's hands moved to his jacket pocket. Can I go to my room now? Don't you want some dinner? You must be... I'm not hungry. Richard stepped closer. Son, we're not trying to punish you. We're trying to protect you. I know. Ethan's voice was barely audible. Can I please go to my room? Catherine looked at Richard helplessly. He nodded. All right, she whispered. We'll talk more in the morning. Ethan turned his wheelchair toward the hallway. 10 minutes later, Richard and Catherine sat on the couch, both staring at nothing. We did the right thing, Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. Catherine didn't respond. She was looking at the family photo on the mantle, the three of them at some charity gala, all dressed up, all smiling. Ethan looked about 7 in the picture. When was the last time we took a photo together? I'll call the lawyer tomorrow. Richard continued. Make sure there's a restraining order if needed. Richard, Catherine's voice cracked. What? Did you see his face? She turned to look at her husband. When that man drove away. Did you see Ethan's face? Richard's jaw tightened. He was upset. Of course he was. But he's 10. He doesn't understand. He looked heartbroken. Catherine. Like we'd taken something from him. Richard stood abruptly. We saved him from a dangerous situation. That's what we did. Did we? Catherine whispered. Before Richard could respond, they heard it. A sound from upstairs. Soft at first, then louder. Crying. Not the angry tantrum of a child who didn't get his way. This was something deeper, rawer, heartbreak. Catherine was on her feet instantly. Ethan! They hurried up the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Ethan's door was closed. Catherine knocked softly. Honey, can we come in? No answer. Just the sound of muffled sobs. She opened the door anyway. Ethan sat in his wheelchair by the window, looking out at the dark street where the motorcycles had disappeared. His Spider-Man mask lay discarded on the bed. The tiny leather vest with the wings hung over the back of his chair. In his hands, he held a photograph. Catherine approached slowly. Ethan. He didn't turn around. You don't understand. Then help us understand. She knelt beside him and Richard stood behind her. Ethan's hands shook as he held up the photo. Catherine took it carefully. The image showed dozens of people, rough-looking bikers in leather vests, their tattooed arms around small children. Some kids were in wheelchairs. Some held IV poles. Some were pale and thin. But every single face was smiling. And in the center sat Ethan, flanked by a little girl clutching a Spider-Man toy, and Dylan, whose hand rested gently on Ethan's shoulder. What is this? Richard asked quietly. Ethan's voice came out broken. That's Lily. She lives at St. Mary's Orphanage. She doesn't have any parents. And that's Marcus, not my Marcus, a different one. He's at the hospital. He has cancer. Catherine's breath caught. And that's Sarah, and Tommy, and Brianna. Ethan pointed to each child. They don't have homes. They don't have families. Some of them are really, really sick. His voice cracked completely. And Dylan and his friends go to see them every Halloween. They bring toys and candy. They make them feel special. They make them feel like someone cares. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. That's what we did tonight. Ethan continued, his words spilling out faster now. We went to the orphanage and the hospital, and we gave kids presents. And I saw... He stopped, wiping his face with the back of his hand. I saw kids who have nothing. Nothing. And they were still happy. Just to get a teddy bear or a candy bar. He looked up at his parents, his face streaked with tears. I've been so mad at you guys. For never being here. For always choosing work over me. For missing Halloween. His voice dropped to a whisper. But those kids, they don't even have parents to be mad at. Catherine's hand went to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I thought I had it so bad, Ethan said. But I have a house. I have food. I have people who care about me. And I've been acting like I'm the most unlucky kid in the world. Oh, baby. Catherine reached for him, but Ethan wasn't finished. Dylan didn't kidnap me. He didn't hurt me. He showed me. Ethan looked down at the photo. He showed me what it means to be a hero. Not the superhero kind, the real kind, the kind who helps people who can't help themselves. Richard had gone completely still, staring at the photo in Catherine's hands. He lost his son, Ethan added quietly. That's why he does this, every year, because his little boy died and he wants other kids to be happy. The room fell silent except for the sound of Catherine's quiet crying. She looked at Richard. His eyes were red, his jaw clenched tight. We were so wrong, Catherine whispered. Richard knelt down beside Ethan's wheelchair. Son, His voice broke. He tried again. We thought we were protecting you. We thought... You thought he was a bad person, Ethan said, because of how he looks. Richard closed his eyes. Yes. He's not, Ethan said firmly. He's the best person I met today. That hit Richard like a physical blow. His own son saying a stranger was the best person he'd met, not his parents. A stranger. Because we weren't there. Ethan, Catherine took his hand. I'm so sorry. We should have been here tonight. We promised, and we broke that promise. It's not just tonight, Ethan said, his voice small again. It's every night, every birthday, every school event. You're never here." "I know." Catherine's voice shook. "I know, baby. And that's going to change." "Is it?" Ethan looked at her with those heartbreaking eyes. "Or are you just saying that?" Richard put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We just wanted the best for you. The business, the money, this house. We thought that's what mattered. That if we could give you everything, you'd be happy." His voice cracked. "We didn't realize." He looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw what he'd been missing. "We didn't realize you needed us." Ethan's lip trembled. "I did. I do." Richard pulled him into a hug, awkward at first because of the wheelchair, but then Catherine joined, wrapping her arms around both of them, and Ethan finally broke. He sobbed into his father's shoulder, 10 years of loneliness pouring out all at once. Catherine stroked his hair, her own tears falling freely. Richard held him tight, feeling the weight of every missed bedtime story, every canceled promise, every business trip that had seemed so important at the time. "I'm sorry," Richard whispered. "I'm so sorry." "We're going to do better," Catherine added. "We promise. No more broken promises." They stayed like that for a long time, a family finally holding each other in a house that had been too empty for too long. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan wiped his eyes. "Dylan didn't do anything wrong." Richard nodded slowly. "I know." "We owe him an apology," Catherine said quietly, looking at her husband. Richard looked at the photo, at this man who had done more for their son in one night than they'd done in months. "Yes," he said, "we do." Ethan picked up the photo, holding it carefully. "He didn't steal me," he said softly. "He showed me what love looks like." Catherine's breath hitched, and she pulled Ethan close again. Outside the window, the street was dark and quiet. The Halloween decorations flickered in the wind. But inside that room, something had shifted. Something broken had started to heal. The morning sun barely broke through the gray clouds as Richard pulled the Mercedes onto Crescent Lane. Catherine sat in the passenger seat, hands folded tightly in her lap. In the back, Ethan stared out the window, his wheelchair secured beside him. None of them had slept much. "There," Ethan said, pointing. "That's his house." The weathered two-story looked different in daylight, less ominous, more tired. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged slightly, but the lawn was neatly trimmed. The black Harley sat in the driveway, chrome gleaming despite the overcast sky. Richard parked on the street. His hands remained on the steering wheel for a moment. "Are you sure about this?" Catherine asked quietly. "No," Richard admitted, "but we're doing it anyway." He got out, retrieved Ethan's wheelchair from the trunk, and helped his son into it. Catherine straightened her coat, designer expensive, completely out of place on this working-class street. They approached the house slowly. From somewhere in the garage, they heard the clank of metal on metal, the whir of a power tool, then silence. Richard knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. "Maybe he's not," Catherine started. The garage door rolled open with a loud rattle. Dylan stood there, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. He wore jeans and a faded gray t-shirt, his tattooed arms streaked with grease. His face was unreadable when he saw them. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed." His voice was flat neutral. "Ethan." "Dylan." Ethan's face lit up, but the brightness dimmed when he saw Dylan's expression. Dylan didn't smile, didn't move, just stood there looking at them like they were strangers who'd knocked on the wrong door. Richard cleared his throat. Could we talk to you for a moment?" Dylan glanced back into the garage, at the partially disassembled motorcycle, at the tools scattered across the workbench, then back at them. "I've got work to do." "Please," Catherine said. "Just a few minutes." Dylan studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he stepped aside and gestured toward the driveway. They followed him to a weathered wooden bench near the side of the house. Dylan sat on an overturned crate, arms resting on his knees, still holding the rag. Richard and Catherine stood. Ethan rolled his wheelchair close to Dylan, positioning himself between his parents and the man who'd shown him kindness. "We came to apologize," Richard began, his voice stiff with discomfort, "for last night, for the way we reacted." Dylan didn't respond, just looked at him with those steel blue eyes. Catherine stepped forward. "We were frightened. We thought," her voice caught, "we thought something terrible had happened to our son." "I understand," Dylan said simply. "No, you don't." Catherine's voice strengthened. "We accused you of something horrible. I struck you." Her hand moved unconsciously to her mouth, as if she could take back the slap even now. That was unforgivable. Dylan's expression softened slightly. "You were protecting your child. That's what parents do." "We should have listened," Richard said. "Should have asked questions before jumping to conclusions." "You didn't know me." Dylan shrugged. "All you saw was a biker with tattoos taking your kid." "I get it." "That's not an excuse," Catherine said firmly. "We judged you based on your appearance, based on stereotypes. That was wrong." Dylan looked down at his oil-stained hands, at the tattoos covering his forearms, the skulls and flames and chains that had terrified so many people over the years. "People usually do," he said quietly. "That doesn't make it right." Silence settled over them, uncomfortable but necessary. Ethan reached out and touched Dylan's arm. Tell them about Jamie." Dylan stiffened. His jaw worked, and for a moment it looked like he might refuse, but then he let out a long breath. "Jamie was my son," he said, his voice low and rough. "My boy. He'd be 17 now if—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "If he'd lived." Catherine's hand went to her chest. "My wife, Sarah, she had complications during the pregnancy." Dylan stared at a spot on the ground somewhere far away. "They tried everything. Emergency C-section, transfusions, but—" His voice cracked. "Sarah hemorrhaged. They couldn't stop it." His hands tightened into fists. "She died on the table. And Jamie, he was born too early. Too small. His lungs weren't developed." Richard closed his eyes. "He lived for 3 hours. Dylan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 hours. I got to hold him once. He fit in my hands, this tiny, perfect little person. And then he was gone." A tear rolled down Catherine's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "That was 15 years ago," Dylan said. "Halloween night." Ethan's hand tightened on Dylan's arm. "For the first few years, I couldn't do anything on Halloween. Just stayed home, drank, tried to forget." Dylan's voice was steady now, but heavy. "Then Hawk, my buddy from the club, he dragged me to a children's hospital one year. Said I needed to get out of my head." He finally looked up, meeting Catherine's eyes. "We walked into the pediatric ward, and there were all these kids. Sick kids. Kids with cancer, with disabilities, kids who'd been abandoned. And they were so happy just to have visitors, just to have someone bring them a cheap toy or a candy bar." Dylan's throat worked. "I realized something that night. Jamie never got to experience Halloween, never got to dress up, or go trick-or-treating, or eat candy until he felt sick." A sad smile crossed his face. "But I could make sure other kids did. Kids who needed someone to care. Kids who needed angels. So that's what we do," he continued. "Every Halloween for the last 15 years. Me and the club. We collect toys and candy all year, and we spend the night delivering them to orphanages, hospitals, foster homes, places where kids don't have much." Catherine sat down on the bench, her legs suddenly weak. "It's how I honor him," Dylan said simply. "How I honor both of them. Sarah loved kids. She was a kindergarten teacher. She would have—" His voice broke completely. "She would have loved doing this." Richard's hands trembled at his sides. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "You weren't supposed to," Dylan said. "I don't do it for recognition. I do it because it's the only thing that makes October 31st bearable." Ethan's eyes were red tears streaming silently down his face. Catherine stood and walked directly to Dylan. Before he could react, she wrapped her arms around him. This man she'd slapped less than 12 hours ago, this man she'd called a monster. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry." Dylan stiffened, then slowly, carefully returned the embrace. When Catherine pulled back, her eyes were wet. "Thank you for what you did for Ethan, for all those children." Richard extended his hand. "I misjudged you completely. Can you forgive us?" Dylan looked at the offered hand for a moment, then clasped it firmly. "Already done." "Dylan." Ethan's voice was small. "Yeah, kid. Can I ask you something?" "Sure." Ethan wheeled himself closer, looking up at this man who'd become so important to him in such a short time. Do you think Jamie would have liked me?" Dylan's expression crumbled. He dropped to one knee so he was eye level with Ethan. "Kid, he would have loved you." Ethan's face scrunched up and he launched himself forward, wrapping his arms around Dylan's neck. Dylan caught him holding this small, brave boy who reminded him so much of what he'd lost. His shoulders shook, and Catherine realized with a start that this enormous tattooed biker was crying silently, but crying. "I miss him so much," Dylan whispered, his voice muffled against Ethan's shoulder. "Every single day." "I know," Ethan said, his own voice thick with tears. "But you're helping so many kids. You're helping me." They stayed like that for a long moment, the boy and the biker both holding on to something precious. When they finally pulled apart, Dylan wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. "Sorry, I don't usually—" "Don't apologize," Catherine said softly. "Please." Dylan nodded, collecting himself. He stood and Ethan looked up at him with bright, determined eyes. "Dylan." "Yeah. Next year. Can we make it bigger?" Dylan blinked. "What?" "The Halloween ride. Can we make it bigger? Visit more places? Help more kids?" Ethan's voice grew stronger, more excited. "My parents have connections, resources. We could raise money, get more toys, reach more hospitals." "Ethan," Richard started. "We could really make a difference," Ethan interrupted, looking at his father. "Couldn't we?" Richard looked at his son, this boy who'd seen poverty and sickness and had responded not with fear, but with hope, not with pity, but with action. He looked at Catherine. She nodded, tears still glistening on her cheeks. "Yes," Richard said. "Yes, we could." Dylan stared at them, something like hope flickering in his eyes for the first time. "You'd want to help." "We'd be honored to," Catherine said. "If you'll let us." "We owe you that much," Richard added, "and so much more." Dylan looked down at Ethan, who is grinning now, really grinning, with that same brightness he'd had in the photo from the hospital. "What do you say?" Ethan asked. "Partners." Dylan's throat worked. He glanced at the house behind him, at the closed door that led to a room full of untouched toys, at the life he'd built around a memory. Then he looked back at Ethan, at this family that had come to say they were sorry, to make amends, to help. And for the first time in 15 years, October 31st felt like something other than an ending. It felt like a beginning. "Partners," Dylan said, his voice rough but steady. Ethan thrust out his hand. Dylan took it, and they shook small hand in large Spider-Man and the Hell's Angel. Catherine pulled out her phone. "May I?" Dylan looked confused. "May you what?" "Take a picture of the three of you." Dylan hesitated, then nodded. Catherine stepped back as Ethan positioned his wheelchair between Dylan and Richard. Richard put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. Dylan did the same on the other side. And for the first time since Sarah and Jamie had died, Dylan smiled for a camera. The flash captured it, a broken family starting to heal, a grieving man finding purpose again, and a boy who'd learned that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather and ride Harleys. "Thank you," Catherine said, looking at the image on her phone. "This is perfect." "Can I see?" Ethan asked. She showed him. In the photo, three faces looked back, all of them smiling, all of them connected by something deeper than blood. Hope. Dylan stood brushing off his jeans. "I should probably get back to work." "Of course." Richard extended his hand again. "We won't keep you, but would you consider coming to dinner sometime at our house? We'd love to have you." Dylan looked surprised. "You sure about that?" "Very sure," Catherine said. "Please. It would mean a lot to us." To Ethan. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "Please, Dylan." Dylan looked at the three of them, this family that had feared him, judged him, and then returned to make it right. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'd like that." "Next weekend?" Catherine asked. "Next weekend," Dylan confirmed. They said their goodbyes, and the Reeds returned to their car. As Richard started the engine, Ethan looked back at the house. Dylan stood in the driveway watching them go. When he saw Ethan looking, he raised his hand in a wave. Ethan waved back, grinning. As they drove away, Catherine reached back and squeezed Ethan's hand. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." "For what?" "For seeing what we couldn't," Richard said, glancing at his son in the rearview mirror. "For knowing that people are more than what they look like." Ethan looked down at the photo on his mother's phone, the one from last night, with all the children and bikers. "Dylan taught me that," he said quietly. "Heroes come in all kinds of shapes." Catherine smiled through fresh tears. "Yes, yes they do." As the Mercedes turned onto Rosewood Drive, the morning clouds finally broke, and sunlight spilled across the neighborhood, warm and golden, chasing away the shadows. Behind them, Dylan stood in his driveway for a long time, looking at the spot where their car had been. Then he walked back into his garage, past the dismantled motorcycle, to the closed door at the back, the room full of toys. He opened it slowly and stepped inside, running his hand along the shelves of action figures and stuffed animals. "You would have liked him, Jamie," he said to the empty room. I think he would have been a good friend to you." The toys didn't answer, but somehow, standing there in the morning light, Dylan felt less alone than he had in 15 years. He picked up the Spider-Man figure, the same one Ethan had admired, and smiled. "Yeah," he said softly. "Next year, we'll make it bigger." And for the first time since that terrible Halloween night so long ago, Dylan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could honor his son's memory by helping others create theirs. One child at a time, one Halloween at a time, one smile at a time. 1 year later, the banner stretched across the entire front of the community center, bright orange letters against white fabric, Little Angels Foundation Halloween Ride 2026. Below it, the parking lot buzzed with organized chaos. Volunteers in matching blue t-shirts, each bearing a small winged logo, loaded boxes into trucks. Tables overflowed with donated toys, still in their packaging action figures, dolls, board games, stuffed animals, art supplies. Another table held industrial-sized bags of candy. A third had wrapped gifts sorted by age group 0, 5, 6, 10, 11, 15. And in the center of it all, directing traffic like a general commanding troops, sat Ethan Reed. "Those boxes go in truck number 3, he called out, pointing. "The hospital gets the first delivery at 4 o'clock, so we need to load those first." A volunteer jogged over. "Ethan, we've got 50 more bikes than last year. Where do you want them staged?" Ethan consulted the clipboard on his lap, a detailed map of routes, times, and destinations. "Split them into 3 groups: hospital route, orphanage route, and shelter route. Each group gets a truck for backup supplies." "Got it, boss." The volunteer grinned and hurried off. Boss Catherine appeared beside him, carrying a box of stuffed bears. "When did my 11-year-old become a logistics coordinator?" Ethan grinned up at his mother. "When you and Dad put me in charge of operations." "Fair point." She set the box down and crouched beside his wheelchair. "How are you feeling? Not too tired?" "Mom, I'm fine." But his eyes were bright with excitement, not exhaustion. "This is the best day of the year." "Second best," Richard corrected, walking up with Dylan beside him. Both men wore matching Little Angels Foundation t-shirts over their jeans. "Christmas is still number 1 in this family." "Debatable," Ethan said, making everyone laugh. Dylan surveyed the organized chaos, shaking his head in amazement. "Kid, you've got 100 volunteers, 3 trucks, 150 bikers, and enough toys to fill a warehouse. How'd you pull this off?" "We pulled it off," Ethan corrected. "You, me, Mom, Dad, the club, all of us." "He's being modest," Catherine said. "This was his vision. We just helped make it happen." It was true. Over the past year, Ethan had transformed a simple Halloween tradition into something extraordinary. The Little Angels Foundation, registered as a non-profit with Richard and Catherine as founding board members, had spent 12 months fundraising, networking, and organizing. Catherine had reached out to her business contacts. Richard had secured corporate sponsorships. Dylan and the Hells Angels had expanded their network to other motorcycle clubs across 3 states. And Ethan, he'd become the heart of it all. News outlets had picked up the story, the boy in the wheelchair who'd ridden with bikers and discovered his purpose. Local papers called him the Spider Boy of Hope. A regional magazine had featured him on their cover. Donations poured in from across the country. But Ethan never let it go to his head. Every interview, every photo op, every speaking engagement, he redirected attention to the children they were helping. To Lily at the orphanage, who now had a new foster family. To Marcus at the hospital, who'd gone into remission. To the hundreds of other kids who just needed someone to care. "All right, everyone." Hawk's voice boomed across the parking lot. The massive biker stood on a flatbed truck using a megaphone. "Listen up. Route assignments are posted on the board. Check your group, check your destination, and load up. We roll out in 30 minutes. A cheer went up from the assembled volunteers and bikers. Dylan knelt beside Ethan. "You ready for this?" Ethan looked out at the crowd, at the bikers in their leather vests, at the volunteers in their blue shirts, at the trucks loaded with hope and joy and second chances. "Yeah," he said softly, "I'm ready." 30 minutes later, the convoy began to move. This time, it was even more impressive than last year. 150 motorcycles, not just Hells Angels, but clubs from neighboring cities who'd heard about the cause and wanted to help. The Iron Riders, the Road Warriors, the Thunder Brotherhood, all unified under one banner helping children. The trucks rolled behind them, escorted by police motorcycles, not to arrest anyone, but to help clear traffic. The mayor herself had approved the route and provided the escort. Ethan rode in the lead sidecar beside Dylan, wearing his Spider-Man costume and the same small leather vest with wings on the back. His helmet gleamed in the afternoon sun. Behind him, Catherine and Richard rode in a classic convertible, waving to the crowds that had gathered along the route. Word had spread about the Halloween ride, and people lined the streets to watch, cheering and waving. Children pointed excitedly. "Look, Mom, it's Spider-Man. It's the little angels. Can we help next year?" The convoy made its way through downtown, then split into 3 groups, each heading to different parts of the city. St. Mary's Children's Home. The first group arrived to find every child waiting on the front lawn, bundled in jackets, bouncing with anticipation. Lily stood at the front, clutching the Spider-Man toy Ethan had given her last year. She was bigger now, healthier, and no longer needed the oxygen tank. Her foster parents stood beside her, smiling. The moment the motorcycle stopped, she ran forward. "Ethan, you came back." Ethan laughed as Dylan helped him from the sidecar. "Of course I came back. I promised, didn't I?" Lily hugged him tight, then looked up at Dylan. "Hi, Mr. Dylan." "Hey there, sweetheart." Dylan ruffled her hair. "You doing okay?" "I have a family now," she said proudly. "A real family. I heard. I'm so happy for you." The bikers unloaded bags of gifts while volunteers organized the distribution. But this year was different, more organized, more thoughtful. Each child received a personalized gift based on wish lists the foundation had collected months in advance. Lily unwrapped hers to find a complete art set with paints, brushes, and canvases. "You said you wanted to be an artist," Ethan explained, "so now you can start." Lily's eyes welled with tears. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Mrs. Patterson stood with Catherine, both women watching the scene unfold. "You've changed so many lives," she said quietly. "Dylan changed ours first," Catherine replied. "We're just passing it forward." Children's Memorial Hospital. The second group arrived at the pediatric wing to a completely transformed space. The hospital had partnered with the foundation to create a Halloween wonderland in the common area, decorations, games, a costume contest, and a massive table loaded with treats and toys. The children who were well enough gathered in the room, many in wheelchairs or with IV poles, but all wearing costumes. A tiny girl dressed as a pumpkin, a boy with a bandaged head wearing a Superman cape, siblings dressed as pirates. Ethan wheeled himself through the crowd, high-fiving kids admiring costumes, distributing gifts. He stopped in front of Marcus, the boy with cancer he'd met last year. Marcus was thinner now, his head completely bald from chemotherapy, but his eyes were bright. "Spider-Man," Marcus said with a weak smile. "You remembered me." "Of course I did." Ethan pulled out a wrapped package. "This is for you." Marcus tore it open. Inside was a signed comic book, an original Amazing Spider-Man issue authenticated and preserved in protective plastic. "No way," Marcus breathed. This is worth. "It's yours," Ethan said firmly. "Real heroes collect strength from other heroes. You're the bravest person I know." Marcus's mother stood behind him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she mouthed to Ethan. Dylan approached with a nurse he'd clearly known for years. They spoke quietly, and Ethan saw Dylan wipe his eyes when he thought no one was looking. This place where sick children fought for their lives, it was holy ground to Dylan, sacred in a way that had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with love. Sunset Homeless Shelter Family Wing. The third group delivered gifts to families living in temporary housing, parents who'd fallen on hard times, children who'd never had a real Halloween. Richard stood beside a single mother with 3 kids listening as she explained how they'd lost their apartment after medical bills piled up. "The foundation has a family support program," he told her gently. "We can't solve everything, but we can help with rent assistance, job placement resources, and childcare while you get back on your feet." The woman's hands shook as she took the informational packet. You'd do that." "That's why we're here," Richard said. "Not just for one night, but for as long as you need us." Catherine worked alongside Rosie, the silver-haired biker, helping distribute coats and winter supplies. "These kids need more than toys," Rosie had told her months ago. "They need basics." So the foundation had expanded, partnering with local organizations to provide clothing, school supplies, and essential resources. This wasn't just charity, this was community. As the sun began to set, all 3 groups reconvened at the community center. Exhausted volunteers unloaded empty trucks. Bikers compared stories from their routes. Children played in the parking lot, some from the hospital, some from the orphanage brought by staff to join the celebration. A stage had been set up with a microphone and speakers. Hawk whistled sharply. "All right, everyone, gather round." The crowd assembled, hundreds of people, all connected by a shared purpose. Dylan stood at the microphone, Ethan beside him in his wheelchair. 15 years ago, Dylan began, his voice carrying across the parking lot. I lost everything. My wife, my son, my reason for living. The crowd went silent. For a long time, I didn't know how to keep going. Then my brothers, he gestured to the assembled bikers. They showed me that the best way to honor the people we've lost is to help the people who are still here. He looked down at Ethan. Last year, this kid taught me something I'd forgotten. That heroes aren't just the ones who ride motorcycles or wear capes. Heroes are the ones who show up, who care, who refuse to let anyone feel alone. Ethan's eyes shimmered. This foundation, this whole thing, it started because one boy wanted to make a difference. And now, look what we've built. Dylan's voice grew stronger. 150 riders, 100 volunteers, 3 trucks full of hope, thousands of dollars in donations, and hundreds of kids who know that somebody out there cares about them. The crowd erupted in applause. Dylan held up his hand for quiet. I want to introduce you to someone, our founder, our inspiration, our friend Ethan Reed. But around here, we call him the Spider Boy of Hope. More applause as Ethan wheeled himself to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, rich and poor bikers and business people and children. A year ago, Ethan said, his voice amplified across the parking lot, I thought I was the loneliest kid in the world. Then Dylan showed me I was wrong. He glanced up at Dylan, who stood beside him with a hand on his shoulder. He showed me that there are kids who have it way harder than me. And he showed me that if you want to stop feeling sorry for yourself, the best thing you can do is help someone else. Ethan's voice grew confident. So that's what we're doing. All of us. We're helping. And we're not going to stop. Next year, we'll reach even more kids. We'll expand to more cities. We'll build more partnerships. Because every single child deserves to know that they matter. The crowd roared with approval. Catherine and Richard stood together, arms around each other, both with tears in their eyes. Their son, the boy they'd almost lost to loneliness, had become a leader. Dylan leaned down to the microphone. Told you kid heroes come in all kinds of wheels. Ethan laughed and the crowd laughed with him. Then, right on cue, the first firework exploded overhead. Orange and purple sparks cascaded across the darkening sky. Then another burst, red and gold. Then a dozen more, turning the night into a kaleidoscope of color. Children gasped and pointed. Adults tilted their heads back in wonder. And in the center of it all, surrounded by friends and family and hundreds of people who'd come together for a single purpose, Ethan felt something he'd never quite felt before. Complete. He looked up at Dylan. Thank you for everything. Dylan's eyes were wet, but he was smiling. No kid. Thank you. Another firework exploded, this one forming a perfect angel shape in the sky, its wings spreading wide before dissolving into golden sparks. Lily ran up and grabbed Ethan's hand. Marcus, too weak to run, but determined, walked slowly over with his mother's help. Other children gathered around all of them, looking up at the sky, faces illuminated by the cascading light. And somewhere above it all, in a place beyond words or understanding, a mother and her baby boy looked down and smiled, because their legacy, the one they'd never gotten to live, was being written in the laughter of children, in the roar of motorcycle engines, in the kindness of strangers who'd become family. The fireworks continued painting the sky with hope. And on the ground below, the angels, both the ones in leather and the ones in wheelchairs, celebrated a truth that would echo long after the last spark faded. Sometimes heroes ride Harleys, sometimes they wear capes, and sometimes they just show up when you need them most.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.